Welcome back, America. We're with John McLaughlin, who is a pollster extraordinaire, but he's more than that. He's a policy guy. He's a substantive guy. McLaughlin and Associates, CEO and partner. He was the Trump pollster in 2020. He's a strategic consultant to many candidates. And I just wanted to say, it was my view, John McLaughlin, before the election, that China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, not to mention Cuba and Venezuela, were all rooting for Joe Biden. And I think I've turned out to be right. What do you think?
You're absolutely right, because when you look at the way the media, the mainstream media, handled the Hunter Biden scandal, where we had done a post-election poll for Brent Bozell from Media Research Center, a third of the voters who voted for Biden had not even heard of the Hunter Biden scandal. And if they had, enough would have switched or not voted for Biden that Trump would have been reelected. And when you think of, I mean, it's serious. When you've got the facts that you continually report on about how Joe Biden and his family, through their corruption, has been paid by these foreign governments, and now he's implementing policies that absolutely benefit them and hurt Americans. And you could go through from canceling Keystone to approving the Russian Nord Stream 2 pipeline, making us dependent on energy again. That's caused all this inflation, that and the government spending. And Americans are suffering for it. And if there was an election today, Republicans would take back not just the House, but also the Senate. And Republicans would win across the country, because last year, where there were elections, like we had in Virginia, New York, and New Jersey, they were close. If the Republicans had put more money in, they probably would have beaten Governor Murphy in New Jersey. So, what's going on right now is the American public wants an election. We put out a poll of likely voters at the end of last month in January, and 65% of all voters said the country's on the wrong track, and 57%, again, of 1,000 likely voters, disapproved the job that Joe Biden was doing. And with those two streams, the Republicans were ahead in the generic ballot for Congress at 48-43, and we don't usually see that. So last time I saw that, I'm an old man, I saw that in 94. In September of 94, I delivered a poll that Haley Barbour sponsored and former Congressman Bill McLaughlin, and the Republicans were up by 7 points in the generic ballot. And the poll was done to see if we had to compromise on Hillary Clinton's Clinton care. And the poll came back, said, don't compromise and you'll win in a landslide. And we did, and we took Congress. It was historic. And now you're seeing those kind of numbers, but we've got to go to November.
All right, a couple of points here. Number one, in these dark blue states like New York and California and some of the others, the Democrats are making great headway in gerrymandering. And they're trying to literally ensure that Republicans have no representation. So they don't really believe one person, one vote. They believe one Democrat, let's win, pretty much. Right. And so they're going to have an outsized impact on this gerrymandering. The Republicans don't seem capable of doing a whole lot about it, which always troubles me. You have their law firms that get involved in these elections. They change election laws at the 11th hour. And if you try and change them back, you're accused of trying to rig an election. And if you raise issues about it after the election, it's said, get over with it, move on to the next election. So I think we have that element within the Republican Party, the rhinos, the never-Trumpers, and just some people who are way too passive when it comes to dealing with the other party that is extremely aggressive and win at all costs. And then finally, the cockiness factor. I see people getting on TV and saying, we're going to win in a landslide, predicting we're going to win in a landslide. You tell me if I'm wrong, John McLaughlin. I view these things as military operations without actual weapons. You think George Patton would have said when he went up against Rommel in North Africa, we're going to win in a landslide? Do you think when he brought his army through Germany, he said we're going to win in a landslide? I think it's a mistake for Republicans to talk and think like this, and they should always operate like they're behind.
I fully agree. And that's, by the way, in both campaigns where I was working with Donald Trump, I kept saying it was a close election. We needed to work through until the time the polls were closed. In 2020, we had to work through until the time where they were counting votes for weeks after. But what's interesting
a month
is
later.
You mentioned New York. Yeah, right. We and still, who knows? I mean, Georgia, they still don't have. There's 300,000 ballots where they don't have chain of custody records because of the Zuckerberg drop boxes. And but you mentioned New York, and I'm from New York. I work all over the country, work all over the world in democracies. But in New York, The New York State Conservative Party is the conscience that will hold the Republicans to task. And my great friend, the late, great Pat Caddell, was a pollster who I worked with, and he was a Trump supporter, even though he'd been Jimmy Carter's pollster back in the day. He had a saying that the Democrats are the crooked party and the Republicans are the stupid party. And he's not wrong. When you look at what's gone on in New York, where the Democrats are putting us on the heels, where they're saying Texas, Ohio, you got to redo the gerrymander plan. It's not fair. It's not right. It's not compact, all that. New York, they're just rolling people over. In New York State, the Conservative Party, and this is like a really untold story, but in New York State, the Democrats had 3 state amendments on proposals on the ballot last November. One was Prop 1 to count illegals in redistricting. Prop 3 was same-day registration in a state where you're not allowed to ask for voter ID. Prop 4 was no excuse absentees to enable ballot harvesting. And guess what? The Conservative Party launched a $4 million campaign that beat all 3 of those props in deep blue New York. And we did the polling. And you know why? Because the voters in New York State said it would lead to fraud. And this was very important because I work for Lee Zeldin, and we hope Lee will be the next governor so he gets to fire the Manhattan DA Bragg, so he gets to repeal cashless bail. And in New York State, we had elections in November where we beat the Democrat DA candidate, who was one of the authors of the cashless bail law. We beat him resoundingly 58-42 with Ann Donnelly for DA. We took the county executive's race that nobody thought we could take by 2,000 votes. And we elected even council members in New York City, and we had great turnouts in upstate New York, and they elected a Republican DA in Suffolk. So it's not just Virginia.
John, let me interrupt you briefly here and just say, I understand this wave is across the country. People are disgusted. Not just Virginia, not just New York, not just New Jersey, Texas, Colorado, other deep blue areas. But it's important that the Republicans learn from this and not blow up. More when we return. We'll be right back. Welcome back. John McLaughlin. Joe Biden. Do the American people like him? Do they think he's competent? Do they like his policies? Is he dragging down the Democrat Party? And what about Kamala Harris?
They don't like him. And the Democrat Party right now is cracking up because of Joe Biden, meaning that their coalition, the Republicans have the ability to win the Hispanic vote, not just gain among it. They have the ability to win African-American votes, but it's because of his job disapproval. We were saying in May and June it was starting to decline because voters thought the economy was headed in the right direction. And we publish a monthly survey on McLaughlinOnline.com, and right now you got 63% of all voters telling us the economy is getting worse, not better. And it's his policies that have caused inflation, cost of living increases. People are going sticker shock at the stores. The Biden tax is a hidden tax by inflation. So you've got 22% of all voters who voted for Biden. That poll I mentioned, in January, we had 51% of the poll told us they voted for Biden for president. But 22% of those voters right now disapprove of the job Joe Biden's doing. 22% of the Democrats disapprove of the job Joe Biden's doing. So Joe Biden, and ironically, 60% of all voters think he should have a cognitive test and make it public. And it goes across the political spectrum in very big numbers. So the American public is really worried right now that Joe Biden is leaving America leaderless, that we're in a dangerous world. The country's headed on the wrong track. 2/3 of the voters told us they're headed in the wrong direction. Other polls, other media polls have it even higher. And they don't see a president who's capable of turning things around. And he's not changing the policies that are failing.
Yeah, I would think it's more important to know if the President of the United States has some level of dementia. Let's be honest, that's what we're talking about, rather than endlessly pushing for Donald Trump's tax returns. I think that would be relevant. Obviously, the media doesn't give a damn. Now, in terms of Joe Biden, the issues and so forth, right behind him is Kamala Harris. As I understand it, she fares even worse among the American people.
Now, Kamala Harris, when I see her poll numbers, she's impeachment insurance. She's a 39 favorable, 56 unfavorable. Right now, Biden will lose in our monthly poll. He's losing to Donald Trump 49-44, but Kamala Harris, Trump gets 51, Harris only 40. And the latest version of a savior is Hillary Clinton, and Trump would beat her 51-41. So the Democrats really are leaderless, and it's because their policies are so bad right now. They've weakened America. And by the way, what really triggered the collapse on top of the bad economies and things sliding, going in the wrong direction, and the radical big government socialist policies, it was the surrender of Afghanistan in August. So in August, my friend Stephen Harper called me, and he was the Prime Minister of Canada. And he said to me, this is not a withdrawal. This is a surrender. And he was right. And we found in subsequent polling, the majority of Americans, 58%, agreed that actually it was a surrender to the people that had actually attacked America on 9/11. So Joe Biden is right now, America is in a very dangerous place with him as president.
And what's interesting to me, John McLaughlin, is most of these issues you bring up, inflation, all that, the price, which affects price of food and gasoline, affects families directly, affects their jobs, affects their small businesses. Even though Biden still has the media behind him, with a few rare exceptions, and people get excited, I don't get excited, still defending him. They're certainly not pounding him the way they pounded Trump or the way they pounded Reagan when he had a recession and so forth. The people don't give a damn what the media say because they feel it personally at the dinner table. They feel it at their automobile. They feel it at their place of work. But John McLaughlin, it must frustrate you. I remember in the Reagan days when there was a recession, the big networks were constantly showing us food lines, soup kitchens, the homeless people. You seeing much of that, the homeless people and the food lines and all the rest? I remember Mitch Snyder in Washington, D.C. and stuff like that. You're not seeing much of that from the media, are you?
You're not, but the voters are getting it out there. One of the great things is the internet. And voters are sharing that, and they're seeing it like in New York. They don't go on the subways anymore. It's too dangerous. There's a national crime crisis. So people are seeing it in their daily lives, and they're sharing it with each other, and they're talking about it, and it's only the mainstream media is trying to keep it quiet, and they're losing a lot of credibility.
John McLaughlin, I want to thank you very, very much. What is that site again where people can go and look at some of your numbers and your research?
It's McLaughlinonline.com, so they can check all the numbers we discussed.
All right, and there's much, much more there than we were able to discuss, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, sir. We'll be right back.